Russian President Vladimir Putin was on an Asia tour last week. On Wednesday, he landed in North Korea, where he and Kim Jong-un signed a landmark deal for defense for immediate military assistance if either faces armed aggression. After this, President Putin headed towards Vietnam to meet President To Lam to re-strengthen the old communist ties between the two nations. Putin's visit came amidst new Western sanctions on Moscow over the Ukraine war. Canadian parliamentarians observed a moment of silence to mark the death anniversary of Khalistani separatist and Canadian citizen Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Khalistani groups were also allowed to take out processions in different Canadian cities, where they shouted anti-India slogans over the killing and called for a trial against Indian officials and Prime Minister Modi. This came a day after Trudeau had said that keeping Canadians safe is a priority in reference to the Nijjar killing. Taking China's panda diplomacy forward, Beijing has offered to send Australia 2 new pandas during Premier Li Chang's visit to Adelaide Zoo. Li's arrival in Australia on a 4-day trip is the first by a Chinese leader in 7 years, marking improving ties between the two countries. China is seeking to increase its influence in the South Pacific, expanding security and economic ties with island states that are historically allied with Australia. After last week's oil spill near Sentosa Island of Singapore, its affected neighbour Malaysia has commenced a cleanup drive where 400 tons of fuel was released into the sea. The spill was caused by a Netherlands-flagged dredger, Vox Maxima, hitting and rupturing one of the oil cargo tanks of Singapore-flagged bunker vessel Marine Honour at the Pasir Panjang container terminal on the 14th of June. A Swedish judge on Thursday acquitted a former Syrian army general, Brigadier General Mohammad Hamo, of indiscriminate attacks on civilians in his home country more than a decade ago, as the prosecutors failed to provide evidence of his involvement in the war crimes. He was charged with aiding and abetting crimes against international law. Surprisingly, the Stockholm District Court said it was clear that the Syrian army's warfare included indiscriminate attacks that violated international law. However, Judge Katarina Fabian said prosecutors did not produce sufficient evidence to convict Hamo. Hello, you're watching Global Compass, the weekly show that updates you on all that has been happening around the world. In our next segment, let's look into some of the stories that were specifically featured on Strat News Global. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday in New Delhi. During the meeting, Modi assured him that India was committed to the India-US Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership. The NSA was on a 2-day visit to chair the second meeting of the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies, or ICET, with his Indian counterpart Ajit Doval. Earlier, Sullivan also met External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who expressed confidence that the strategic partnership between India and the US will continue to advance strongly. The death toll of Hajj pilgrims has crossed 600, out of which 68 were Indians, confirmed by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has not provided information on fatalities, though it reported more than 2,700 cases of heat exhaustion on Sunday alone. According to a Saudi study published last month, temperatures in the area where rituals are performed are rising by 0.4 degrees Celsius each decade due to climate change. The Philippines Armed Forces released a video of the latest confrontation with China in the West Philippine Sea, where China Coast Guard personnel can be seen on rubber boats surrounding Philippine Navy personnel and puncturing holes in a Philippine inflatable boat. The Philippines alleged that the Chinese looted firearms and deliberately punctured Philippine boats. Military Chief Romeo Browner said in a briefing, quote, "The Chinese have no right or legal authority to hijack our operations and destroy Philippine vessels. They boarded our boats illegally, then got our equipment. They acted like pirates." Unquote. Repeated pleas by China to restart direct passenger flights between India and China, suspended since 2020 following the Galwan clash, continue. China has repeatedly requested India's civil aviation authorities to re-establish direct air links, considering it a big issue. India, however, has maintained a stance that there can be no normalization of other ties until peace and tranquility are restored in the border areas. In June 2020, in clashes in Galwan, at least 20 Indian soldiers and reportedly up to 40 Chinese troops were killed. Both countries have deployed and maintained tens of thousands of troops in the region since the clashes. Moving on to the African continent. The civil war that erupted in Sudan last April between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has killed over 15,000 people and has now displaced nearly 10 million people in the region, making it the worst humanitarian crisis of the 21st century. The United Nations claims that the human rights and humanitarian situation in Sudan cannot improve without an immediate ceasefire. To discuss this further, we talked to Amoko Ben, a Sudanese who serves as a senior officer in the Immigration Department of South Sudan. Born in Sudan, Amoko Ben watched the decade-long civil war disturbance and army rule throughout his life till the division of the two countries, after which he went to South Sudan. Sharing his personal experiences and anecdotes, he highlighted the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. Here is an excerpt. So let us, talk about the ongoing crisis in Sudan. In fact, it is being termed as one of the worst, the severest humanitarian crisis of the 21st century. Millions and millions of people have been displaced. So first, let's start this interaction with whatever information you have and you can give us on what exactly is the ground situation in Sudan right now.
The situation in Sudan, indeed, it's very difficult. Millions and every day people are dying, but less is being reported. As I'm talking to you, I'm at the border between Uganda and South Sudan, Nimole. Every day you see two buses carrying people to refugee camps. When you compare that in a week, a bus carrying more than 64, two buses daily, women and children, including men, are fleeing conflict. Secondly, at the airport, Juba International Airport, because that's the only airport official international, you see every day people are fleeing, entering Juba to Uganda. The situation is difficult, not only for women, but for entire human being.
The situation is so grave. Like we have received reports that 8 million people have been displaced, and you're saying every day there are buses after buses of women, children, and men, fleeing the country. Such a huge crisis. Do you think this issue is getting enough international attention?
The challenge now is that Sudan has been for years under sanction when they were fighting between the Sudan People Liberation Movement, which is under Sudan. So Sudan has been under sanction, and most of these international media, once you are under sanction, they also prevented you from accessing you because when you talk of international community, the first priority goes to America, and most of these sanctions are implied by America. So when you don't comply with their rules, also your media can be under sanction. Sudan is out of, when you see these reportings, only few who reported the situation in Sudan. Even when I saw your request that you need to know the situation in Sudan, I said, God, this is a blessing.
Yeah, difficult indeed. I mean, what you're telling me is not really giving anyone any, I don't see where to ask you any question about a sliver of hope that you can see anywhere. uh, but okay, let me first, okay, let's move on to your personal journey now. You said you are in South Sudan right now, right?
I'm now in South Sudan.
How did you escape from there?
I'm a South Sudanese now. Formerly, I was in Sudan. Uh, when South Sudan break away from Sudan, so I became automatically a South Sudanese. So as you're interviewing me as a South Sudanese. I'm able to give this detailed information because we have been together. I was born under when it was the government of Sudan. They called it the Republic of Sudan. But now we are independent. But we know each other.
So, how do you see this entire conflict and the whole crisis? How do you see it panning out? We have, less than 6 months to go for 2024 to get over. Do you think the situation will improve by then at least?
It's very difficult to predict because you see one side on the ground, the rebels who are the paramilitaries, they are controlling, but aerial bombardment and via airspace because the army has the capacity. The only way is if the international community can put their pressure on the army, most especially the Sudan armed forces. The rebels are ready to negotiate, but Burhan is not ready to negotiate, and any conflict ends on the table.
So, wherever the refugee camps are, how is the situation over there? Because refugee camps, can be very difficult places in terms of weather, in terms of health, in terms of hygiene, and all of that. It can be very difficult to survive in a humanitarian, relief shelter as well. So, all these millions of people who have been displaced and they've crossed the borders in different countries, how are the governments, how's the UN, how are they being taken care of? What is the challenge you see there?
When you rely on relief is not enough. Even if on daily basis you are given 50 kg of wheat flour or maize flour, it is not enough because you don't produce. But if you get little from your own, you feel happy. With this relief, anytime they can cut it off. And with the ongoing situation of climate change, COVID, people are coming back from COVID situation. You doesn't know anything can happen. And as personal as Amoko, I don't advise people to survive on relief.
You can watch the entire interview on Strat News Global on Tuesday. I do hope you have subscribed to this channel and gotten your friends and family who are interested in foreign affairs to do it as well.